What's up? What's up? What's up? This is your girl, Yuta K. Best, and you're listening to Hello Random Radio, where positive energy lives. Today, my guest is the beautiful Jessica Havens of Love, Unity, Liberation, right? Love, Unity, Liberation. How are you doing today?
I am doing all right. I think I'm excited for this conversation with Yuta. It is always blessed and pretty magical. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, yes, thank you for being here. And today we're recording this on the full moon in Aries. And it's going to be posted, much later than that. But I think it's important to name, that we're dealing with this energy kind of unexpectedly. Neither one of us realized it was the full moon when we scheduled this event. But I think that it is important. We pulled some cards before we started recording, and the card that I got is from the Dark Goddess Tarot. It is called Skadi, Skadi, who is apparently a Scandinavian goddess. And for me, this card is about spiritual initiation. I really feel like we're at a point where we have the opportunity to really, with intention, release the past, release limits, release anything that really is not allowing us to be the most authentic version of ourselves so that we can really step into this next phase as more whole and complete versions of ourselves. And the main phrase on the card says, hone the skills that lead to freedom, and the card talks about her, getting to marry to someone who she was incompatible with and them trying to make it work anyway, and going back and forth and compromising, and then ultimately realizing that no one was happy, and so they separated and returned, to their respective homes, and love landed. And so I just think that this is a really important time to really examine yourself and your beliefs and the way that you're moving through the world, and start to take at least baby steps, towards things that are really going to bring fulfillment and happiness, and ultimately freedom. And freedom doesn't mean that, you're by yourself. It just means that whoever you're with and wherever you're at, you are the most authentic version of yourself, So yeah, and then I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your card before the intro.
Sure. I'm putting on my readers because that's what happens as you get older. So I also pulled a card for today. Also did not realize it was going to be a full moon reading, but synchronicities always. So the card I pulled was from Beyond Lemuria deck. And this is what the card actually looks like. And I pulled the crown chakra card. And the crown, I'm going to read just a little bit of it. The crown chakra is your link to the multi-dimensionality of your being, the seat of your soul. It connects you to the heavens. The infinity symbol of limitlessness appears with the unfolding petals and points to your most potent potential. Here you can delight in the divine strands of light that dance with us when we are aligned with spirit, purpose, and truth. Be present and flowing without rigid outcomes. Find more spaces in your life. Find your own way to meditate. When you are distracted, you are living on the surface level. Explore the state of flow and be receptive to the intuitive messages you may receive.
Ashe.
So it is.
And so it is, and so it is. And I just want to touch briefly, I think I mentioned spiritual initiation, and I'm just compelled to add that for me, everybody's got to define everything, for themselves. But for me, spirituality or something that is labeled as spiritual is just something that helps us get to know ourselves better. So anytime I feel like I'm going into a new spiritual initiation, I know that the things that I'm encountering, the challenges that I have and whatnot, are things that are happening so that I get to know myself better, you know. So I just wanted to clarify that really quickly. And now I'm going to make space for Jess to go ahead and make whatever self-introduction you are compelled to make today.
Well, thank you so much, Yuta, for having me on the show. What's up, everybody? Jessica Havens here. I guess out in the world, I am a DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist, facilitator. I use a heart-centered lens to do that work. But a little bit about me. So I'm in my 40s now, and I started out like professionally just in the social justice space. So I was a social justice educator, all of those things. I grew up in Chicago and was there for most of my adult life. And I think I just have a kind of an interesting life story in terms of being like, so I'm a white woman, but I'm like, it's not like I'm Greek or Italian or, you know what I mean? I'm like thinking of the Scandinavian, I'm like Scandinavian, you know what I mean? I'm like that kind of white. And I grew up in a family that was a religious family, super social justice focused. So we sort of grew up with like Jesus as a revolutionary. Longer part of that like tradition, but that was the tradition I was raised in. And so it sort of gave me this gift of like, feeling this calling to serve the world in some way. And that, dove me into education. But I think my whole life has been interesting just around race and identity. We may talk about that at some point, as being this like a white, very super white presenting person. And then growing up feeling very much raised by Black, brown, and white communities on the south side of Chicago. So I was kind of like a white nerd in those spaces, and really wrestled with identity and, who I was. And there never seemed to be quite a box that explained my cultural like navigation of the world and why I could move in these different spaces. So eventually that led me into my current work. And I would say one of the biggest things to know about me in terms of thinking about spiritual initiation is, there's many of us who have transitioned or in that process of transitioning from being very much like activist minded. So being very involved in like movements on the street and protests and organizing and, I guess you could say fighting the system, which is what kind of got me into DEI, was my commitment to racial justice work. But I would say over the last 10 years, I've been on this slow, like spiritual path. And then I feel like my big aha moment happened in 2020. I microdosed on some psilocybin and had this sort of like awakening experience in 2020. And I would say since then, I think one of the things I struggle with, but I also bring into my work, is how to move into a more healer role while I continue to do the work that I do. And this spirit, feeling like once you're on the spiritual path, you can't really get off of it. I mean, I guess you can, but it just feels like, the downloads and insights keep coming. And so it's really, trying to figure out how to bridge sort of the spiritual self with this very 3D, work that I do, which is, based on like making systems more inclusive, et cetera, et cetera. So I would just say that's been part of my journey, is trying to figure out how to do that, and rejecting the notion of like selling out, or rejecting the notion of like the work that I do is now soft as opposed to like in your face. And like, so anyways, that's a little bit of my journey. And I think some of that we'll probably talk about in a little bit, and part of how you and I are connected.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure how to ask the question. But this whole idea, like for me, and probably because of my lens, being almost completely, spiritual, when you say diversity, equity, and inclusion, even though those can be very left brain concepts and words, I mean, helping people to do whatever work is required to be open to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to me, that is spiritual.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's interesting that you perceive a divide between the work, I guess, as it's generally accepted, and maybe in the ways that you are growing in offering it. Can you talk a little bit about why you feel the work is more left-brained, or?
Well, it's funny because I know in my heart, I agree with you about this being spiritual work, like that this being very healing work. And I think it's for anybody familiar with DEI work, you know that there's a wide range of what that looks like. Like saying that you do DEI work doesn't always tell anybody what kind of work you do, because a lot of the work is like transactional. So especially when, you know, I was part of Black Lives Matter for years, but when it really took off in 2020, all of a sudden, all these organizations were rushing to create DEI departments, create racial justice statements, all of these pieces. And it was a blessing in disguise, a blessing and a challenge to have all of a sudden there's like, everybody wants a DEI position, everybody wants a program, but so much of it was not well thought out. And because people separate in their minds, like the professional from the personal and political and spiritual, which I do not, but many organizations do, you know, like this is a work thing. It was a challenge. It's been a challenge to find work that feeds my soul with people who really want to do transformative change, which is very different than like transactional change, where someone just wants you to come in. Can you just come in and run this like workshop and then like fix all the things? You know, like that used to be work I would accept just for like payment. And now it's interesting to figure out where are those places where it's more aligned. But I'm with you. I don't see it as separate, but sometimes when we're doing it for paid work on an institutional level, it's like hard to, even your language, you know what I mean? Like depending on who I'm marketing to, you know, I need to make sure, is this language too fluffy? Is this too spiritual, too woo-woo? Is that going to push them away? But also, how can I be authentic about that? I bring in a heart-centered approach. Yeah.
And can I get like an example of like a transactional where you can come in and fix something? Because that sounds not likely.
Yeah. So a transactional approach would be, we want you to come in. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I was working with a large national sort of teacher organization, and this is no fault to the person who was organizing it. This was the limitations they were put, but they said, okay, we're having issues with some of our white teacher trainees understanding what's going on with race. They're working with children of color in the classroom, and we really need some help. I was thinking, maybe could you just come in and run like a workshop on white privilege, like a 90-minute virtual workshop on a Friday? Okay. So
when everybody's checked out.
Right. And I need money, right? So it's like always like, oh, do I take this? Do I not? And so not only is everybody checked out, but it's like white privilege is like, it's not something you can just dive. It's not something you can just dive into. It requires reflection. It requires, you know, and doing it virtually with no follow-up, no, I guess. So that would be an example of, and I gave that feedback. Like, I'd love to work with you all, but this format is not setting me or your teachers up for success. At the end of a work week, on a one-time session where they're just dropping in, you know, to attend. And so I guess that would be an example of a more transactional approach.
And essentially they're doing that just to say that they are doing the work, right? I mean,
well, some people,
to be able to say, I had a DEI person come in and do this thing.
I mean, I definitely think there's some people who see it that way. I think there's other people, to their defense, is that they are not, and it's often folks of color put in this position, right, to like run the diversity work, is that they're often not given the organizational support or the budget support. And so they're asked to sort of like put out fires without any type of institutional support. Resources. Yeah, some people may actually be transactional, and other folks are like, I don't know what to do. I have this small budget. you know, I need to address this issue. Let's do it this way. Yeah.
Fair. How interesting. So how do you see yourself shifting? Like, is there an idea that you have been toying with about how to, you know, take a small step towards, you know, the more, not necessarily woo-woo, but in a place where you feel like you're acting more as healer than perhaps, it sounds like maybe you're in an educator space, you know, and you're kind of slowly shifting into healer as well.
Well, I see them as, I think I am literally, my being as a teacher, as a facilitator. That is one of the biggest energies I carry in this body and this life. So I see those as linked. So I don't see myself moving away from educator, but just finding those spaces where people are open to thinking about healing. So even, I mean, I think how I'm figuring out how to be more aligned with my own path is literally creating my own content, right? Which should be obvious. Like, yeah, you just create your own content. Don't wait to get hired. So the newest project I've been working with my sister and colleague, Stacey Gibson at Transform the Collective, we've been working on this racial affinity group series. And so one of the things that I do with DEI is that I'm really called to is being a bridge. Because of my life experience, I can bridge multiple communities, and feeling very called to be a guide for white people who are looking at doing anti-racism work, but that there's a spiritual component to that, and helping to be a guide in that process of just understanding how this system, people who are privileged from these systems, are also agreeing without knowing it to I don't want to say spiritual damage, but there is a spiritual toll that that is part of this system for those, you know, privileged by it. So whether or not that's someone from the United States, whether that's a man, whether that is a cisgender person, whether that is a white person, right? That really, like, rethinking what we mean by privilege and oppression, to understand the differences between sort of financial and power privilege, and then what does that look like on a spiritual level.
And have you had many opportunities to share that work?
Yes. And every time I do coursework with folks, this is part of the work. And so I started working with a spiritual center here in Denver a couple of years ago with DEI work. And I would say that, you know, in social justice spaces, I feel like there is some spirituality and self-reflection that's sometimes lacking around that. And then in spiritual communities, I feel like there's sometimes, especially if they're like new age spiritual communities, there is a real lack of understanding this system, right? Because if you're committed to consciousness, it can be really easy to spiritually bypass like the actual violence happening here, and that positions us differently to access these things. But I will say, I do really love working with spiritual communities, because even if there is a lack of understanding or sort of ignorance around the 3D systemic oppression system we live in, they have this automatic commitment to self-betterment and reflection that is like, it's just like, it creates such a magical space for transformation, because they're seekers. They want it, so that it makes it a little easier in that sense.
Well, right. And that's why I was asking about your opportunities in the DEI world to kind of work with folks, even in a just mildly spiritual sense.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, what is kind of the general vibe? Are people able? So I assume that some of what you're doing is to help them become aware of some of those unconscious patterns that exist because of natural privilege,
right?
You know, and so are people generally able to see and shift? Are there a lot of people pushing back? I'm kind of interested in like how that goal is going in general.
I mean, I would say In terms of best practice in my work, I don't really like required trainings. So when someone says, oh, we're going to run this training and everybody in this particular group is required to go, I find that's often not the best option.
Right.
So it's a lot easier when people are opting in, whether or not they're resistant. So even people opting in to a training that I do are sometimes resistant or scared or nervous. But yeah, I a lot of, not to like toot my own horn, but a lot of the feedback I get is people feeling like I'm able to hold their hand where they're at and move them forward. Because I'm not really interested in like people memorizing,
I mean, that's not going to help.
No, like the best words, like I'm not into rules, right? And so I push back against the notion of political correctness, and really I really want to shift people's lens to understand, even with language, if we're shifting our language, why are we doing that, right? Like I need people to understand that in their heart, because then that makes a lifelong transformation, right? They can't really go backwards in that, as opposed to memorizing something. Yeah.
Right.
But I generally find people are pretty receptive. And you always have people who are resistant. But one of my practices, when people come to me for coaching for DEI, like, what should I do? I'm working with this board of directors and there's this one guy on there that's like always. And I said, look, don't go after that one guy. I'm like, who's your cheerleader? Who is already into this, and you build with them, not to ignore the person who's a problem. But a lot of times our focus in this work goes to who is the biggest issue, as opposed to
the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Right. And I'm like, you're going to waste so much energy, like working on that, like just, really focus on people who, you're already aligned with, and build with them,
Yeah. And then prayerfully it'll seep out.
Yeah. And then no one's operating by themselves. Like that's the issue too, is people feel a lot of isolation in this work. So
yeah. Awesome. So I'm gonna switch gears, because I wanna come through the spiritual lens back, perhaps, to the DEI space. And again, this is the full moon. So do you generally have like rituals and things that you do when you're playing with a full moon energy?
Yeah, it's a big shift. So these are the things I often leave out when I do DEI work.
Right.
Yeah, no, and I would actually love to hear about your rituals as well, because I feel like I've fallen off my practices. And so, I'm similar to you. I also read tarot, not professionally. I know you do it professionally and you've been in it a lot longer. But I just sort of upgraded my tarot practice about 5 months ago. I've been doing it for like 15 years. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, spirit and I are like in a conversation. So I usually would do like a reading. I used to have sort of a coven of women here, and we would gather on full moons and we would do like a releasing fire, be like extra witchy about it. But lately I've kind of fallen off. So usually with the full moon, which I haven't done today, so this is reminding me, is I do some process of release.
Yeah.
I associate a lot of fire with it. Like I burned some old journals a couple months ago. I was like going through this whole process, and I took out the parts of the journals that I liked. And it was like, I sat with these journals that I was going to like throw away. I was like, what do I need to do with them? I'm going to bury them. And on one of the full moons, I actually put them in a little like cauldron and did a whole, like I wanted to release that portion of my life. And then, so that's what I do for the full moon.
And did you feel it was helpful?
Yes, it was like super. Yeah, it was super powerful. I study quite a bit of astrology, so I'm always like thinking about the planets and the stars. So I find it useful. I think I always shake my head when I find that people don't follow any of those things, because it's so just part of my practice and my world. And I use it less to say, oh, I'm going to have a bad day, or, oh, this thing is going to happen, and more just to say, what is the collective energy on the planet? So I can kind of figure out what's my stuff, what is a collective experience. And it just provides some insight into like how to actually, like similar to that card, how to actually flow through life. And I just like, Anyways, and
And
I
what
also,
happened?
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and also I learned kind of the hard way that on full moons, I find that the collective wiles out. And so I'm pretty mindful of the spaces. Like if it's on a weekend, like this weekend, I'm usually I try to be extra mindful of if I'm going to leave my home, like where I go, because I don't want to participate in people's shenanigans.
Right. And this one is definitely likely to be fairly dramatic.
What about you?
What happened to your circle?
Well, I also want to know about what your full moon practices are. And I have a fly. If I look crazy, there's a fly flying around in my
I saw it. I saw it.
Well, the group, we just like kind of spread out, and I think I don't know if the collective is going through this, but there's just been a lot of shifting of community and feeling like those of us plugged in have really been going through it. And there's been a need to sort of go through a lot of this stuff on our own, which is hard, but yeah.
Where was the last time that y'all gathered as a group? Like intentionally around the full moon?
A year, 2 years.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering because, for me, 2023 is the Seven of Hearts. And so I want to clarify, I do use tarot cards sometimes, especially because a friend of mine, Lelania Simone, created a deck called Tarot of the Cosmic Seed, but I don't consider myself a tarot reader. I read cardology, which is regular playing cards. And then when I am in a space where I'm using a tarot deck for whatever reason, I still translate the minor arcana into my understanding of cardology. And the major arcana, I tend to take somewhat literally or really just look at whatever the guidebook has to say. So just to put it out there, I am by no means, a practiced tarot person. So I wanted to put that out there. For me, the full moon is definitely about letting go. And the one thing that I try to be very consistent about is writing about some painful experience in my past that I think could be blocking my ability to be my most whole and authentic self, or blocking my ability to open up to abundance or love or whatever. Because, the full moon is about letting go. The new moon is kind of about manifesting and calling things in. And the full moon is about releasing. And so that is the one thing. And I have found, that sometimes even when I just write a sentence or two, very, very profound changes seem to happen. I do want to back up a little bit and say that the reason that I was kind of harping on the group and what had happened with y'all is because I was wondering if, as we enter 2023, which is for me a Seven of Hearts, which is boundaries on one hand and unconditional love on the other, I just feel like this year is really forcing people to take a hard look, at themselves and the people that they are with, and really make sure that there's true alignment and not just, oh, we've been friends for 20 years. And so this is what we're supposed to do type of thing. So it was more curiosity and wondering if what I understand about the energy of this time showed up in your group.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but again, for me, the full moon, a lot of different things can happen. I will definitely be hosting a Zoom. I do a lot of like Zoom rituals since quarantine, just gathering together to hold space and offering services and giving folks an opportunity to come together. I do believe that there's a lot of healing that we have to do by ourselves. There's a lot of self-reflection, but then I think that the true big shifts happen in community, because in my opinion, none of us sees ourselves clearly enough to really know whether or not the healing is having the intended effect. It's only when you start to interact with others that you know. So yeah, that is my big full moon work, is to always write about something painful with the intention of freeing myself from that experience.
Well, if I can just share with your viewers, Yuta had given me a reading. I don't know what it was, maybe a month ago, maybe it was around the last full moon. I don't know. And one of the things I took from that was exactly what you're suggesting, is, writing about this pain, something really painful in your life, and as a way to release it, so it's not blocking blessings and, creating blockages and such. And I actually did that after our reading, and I spent 3 hours. I've gone through 3 pregnancies and 3 miscarriages.
Oh, man.
When you said, think of something painful that you need to, I've done tons of healing work around it, but it was like, that was the first thing that came to me. And the next morning I sat down and I wrote for 3 hours, and it was such a cathartic experience. It was so healing. And it really did feel like that process of writing was a release. So I'm a testament to Yuta's practice here. So it's making me think I might do that again today. Yeah.
Yeah, that would definitely be good work. And to continue in the spirituality vein, I know you had reached out to me at some point about like a secret energy group.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Are you still doing work with that group, or?
So some people will know them out there. They have like a whole group of folks that follow them. So if anyone follows Seven Bomar, and he created, along with a whole group of people, I guess you could call it like an online community learning platform called Secret Energy. And it's sort of like all things about the history of this planet, the matrix, how to navigate the matrix, everything from like hacking your body, like hacking, like health hacks, given the kind of poisonous system we live in, to understanding your energy in relationship to the planets, understanding the history of the controllers of this planet. So what families and spaces are actually continuing to run this system, but then always coming back to sort of what is your like refinding and remembering, I guess, your divine power. Which, anyway, so it's a whole bunch of stuff. It's deep dives. And they have a thing called the Interversity. So you can sign up for that. And then they have literally hundreds of hours of coursework. And so I, about 2 years ago, dove into that. And that really sort of like upped my game and having both an understanding of this fake matrix that we are, this programmed reality, and then also sort of like how to hack it, and like what you need to know both spiritually, internally, but also like some pretty concrete pieces of, how to make sure that, we remember our divinity, and that creates magic in our lives. It's co-creation of reality.
Dope. And so you dived into that prior to the awakening that you said that you had in 2020. So I would imagine that a lot of that informed that awakening.
I would feel like there was like a massive awakening, and then I found Seven Bomar probably within like 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's been the last like few years. So, and anybody can find his stuff on YouTube. He is not an intro level person, is what I will just share.
Okay.
He goes in, he would do a 3-hour lecture on like polarity and femininity and masculine. I mean, he's just like, and he has a pretty incredible life story. And what I love about that community is it is definitely majority folks of color, in that space, with white folks. It's very much focused on unity consciousness, but it's just a space that really called to me. If people want to check his stuff out on YouTube. He's a trip.
I mean, and when you say that you had an awakening, I feel like that's just such general language. Is there like a really big understanding that you can articulate that came from the awakening and informed how you shifted and moved differently after the awakening.
Yeah, and I feel like I can share it on your podcast, but maybe not on mine.
That's fair. That's why we're over here.
Yeah, exactly. So like the full truth is, I think I used to understand this reality, the news, our government system as being like, yes, corrupt, but like that this was it. This was the reality we were seeing. Humans have just created it. And this is sort of, corporations and the government sort of run things, and systemic oppression exists. Okay. And I would say that my awakening was the first time I thought about I went back and watched The Matrix multiple times after that, and was the first time I realized or started questioning the realness of this 3D reality. Because I always knew there was a spiritual space. That was part of my process before. But sort of like the more apocalyptic doomsday awakening to the fact that we had sort of been lied to on every level, and that there were entities, people that were controlling our reality that went above the government, that went above just corporations being, money hungry, and that actually... And this is why DEI work, there's a little bit of a challenge there, because also you start to see that both sides. I think I also had a little bit of a heartbreak with liberal left communities, which is where I'm from, that both sides were literally pitted against each other. And I started to see the ways that communities I came from, even though they consider themselves to be liberation minded, and they're the ones who are like the truth seekers, well, I just started to see the ways that even in social justice spaces, people were playing the same narrative in a way that was just replicating the trauma, replicating the pain, and was literally, if you believe there's then these controllers up here, whatever that looks like serves that system, right? So it's not that the controllers aren't white supremacists or paid. They don't care if white supremacy is a tool, right? Or if racial trauma is a tool, right, to keep people basically enslaved under mind control. It's a different shift of perspective in how even I do my work. But yeah, it was a big, and also extra celestial beings, as Natalie Cruz at Strawberry Moon talks about them, as opposed to aliens. I had a whole full awakening around what this reality is. And it's been, I would say, a pretty big grief process for the last 3 years. Besides other magical things, it's been a grief process.
And so one of the big things that came out of that, though, is realizing that the white supremacy is a tool and not just a side effect.
Right. Or the root. I used to believe white supremacy or patriarchy, they were the roots of the problem. And now I see them as tools of control for a larger, and not only it's hard to explain it, right? It's it also keeps say folks of color in a trauma pattern. It keeps white folks ignorant. It keeps all these pieces. And it's very difficult to talk about this without saying you're denying the violence exists, because the violence is real. It is very real.
It's obvious.
It's but trying to figure out how to navigate that when you're the news is bullshit, and also some of it's true. And also even the navigating the media that's been a whole shift for me of trying to, and I think, we don't have to dive into this because this is the more controversial piece, right? But I think the rollout of pharmaceutical, complete control over the last 3 years was also the next big aha. It's been a pretty horrifying process. And I come from communities who I was completely ostracized from because I had different views than what the party line was, if you were anywhere associated with being a Democrat. And yeah, I'll leave that at that, and we can choose to go down that road or not.
Well, yeah, no, that's definitely the road that I'm more interested in. And that controversial or not, it's also the information that people who are trying to find a healthy life need.
Right.
So yeah.
I found too that because I'm a truth speaker. Truth is that I actually also took a lot of flack because I was pretty like public on social media about my concerns. And because people were being brainwashed by the media, people had a perception that anybody who was saying, I don't want this shot, anybody who was saying, questioning anything publicly, like the meme that was literally being pushed around in liberal communities was of this like racist, ignorant white dude in like Alabama on his, I saw this like cartoon and I'm like, oh, this is the exact message that people are sending. He's just like sitting on the toilet reading a newspaper about conspiracy theories, right? And so it was this whole mockery that the only people speaking out about this are like Trumpers.
Idiots.
Yeah, Trumpers, idiots, and so there was a complete, to me, and a lot of people I was connected to were people of color who also agreed with me and also did not feel safe sharing those views, right? Because they didn't want to get pushback from multiple spaces. And it was very touchy because the liberal perspective, whatever you want to call it, leftist, was if you care about people of color, if you care about poor communities, right, the best public health approach is to do mass vaccination, right? Mm-hmm. And that was the narrative that ran through my family, that ran through the communities I come from, like literally it. And the things that people said to me of how disappointed they were that I was questioning things, and I think thought that I had lost my grounding, that I was all of a sudden this right-wing Trumper. And I was like, no, y'all, I still care about racial justice. I care about these things. And I disagree that this is the best move to prove that you care about communities of color. You care, like that was how it was posed. And anyone who disagreed, and I'm white, right, on top of that. And so it was kind of like, anyways, I was an easy target for being like, oh, it's just because you're white, right? Like you don't have to worry about these things, Yeah.
And so these are POC Democrats that are, that are upset with you for asking these questions about whether or not this is safe.
No, it was most white liberals. Yes.
White liberals saying that it's just because you're white?
White liberals judging me feel like, well, because like say like that I'm privileged and I don't have to worry about these things, and here are the outcomes for Black and brown communities for COVID. There was no room for any other. I'm not saying that there weren't folks of color who were also concerned, but most of the pushback I got was from white liberals who, I don't know if it was a posing thing, who like then wanted to distance themselves from me because, the company line in organizational spaces was, equitable public health is getting as many people vaccinated as possible in poor Black and brown communities. And to me, it was like an egregious crime. And yeah, and now people want to forget about it. So yeah.
And why was it, why for you was it an egregious crime?
Well, I did never blamed individuals. I think people were doing, like we said, a lot of people were just doing what they thought was best.
For sure.
But I would say an egregious crime was using the language of liberation and justice to back up something that felt so clearly. There's the money piece of it, and then there's the more sinister part of it, of like what was actually in that shot, and how it will affect humanity. And the thing is like, I or other people I know won't necessarily be proven correct for 10 years, 20 years. This is we had generational concerns about the fate of humanity. And that yet again, people, and I'm getting goosebumps, people of color were being used as pawns in what felt like a larger, and people were like just drinking it up. And people who were so knowledgeable about so many social justice issues, and somehow healthcare and integrative medicine was like I feel like it was like people's fear of death. People's fear of death just came out, and somehow there was an exception for this piece. And I was like, you've never supported pharmaceutical companies before, you know. Anyways, I'm this is like, I can even like, oof, I haven't talked about this in a while, Yuta.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is probably also some of the stuff that, you know, might be processing, you know, the trauma that you experienced during that breakup, and the disappointment that had to be the result, you know, of these people that you thought were your comrades, you know, who were suddenly demonizing you. You know, like those are the kind of things we think we just get over, but it's stuck in ourselves, you know. Anyway, yeah. But to get away, you know, from the personal, and not to dive too much in the political, I definitely am very, very divorced, and people, I am one of those people who earn all the names that you give a politically uneducated person. But I gotta say, you know, I did read Michelle Obama's Becoming. And, you know, the one thing that I got from that is her disappointment at finding that the bipartisan system, you know, to me, it feels like it's almost like a cop-out, because it's like we're siding with this issue just because someone from our side put it together, and it doesn't matter how smart or dumb or whatever it is. A Democrat said it, so I'm a Democrat and I have to back it up. Right. You know, and that is, to me, is absolutely unfathomable. I was not given a brain so that I agree automatically with everything my homie said just because my homie said it.
Right. Right.
You know, so I'm not going to talk about that. I don't want to talk too much about that. I'm talking about it. But I feel like that's probably the same thing, you know, with this drug and whatever other drugs, you know, are going to be coming down the pipeline to fix these quote unquote problems. Except that it is actually, I mean, I guess it's all been very dangerous for an uneducated person to just accept what is being handed down the line. But I feel like in the past, it was maybe mental and emotional damage. And now when we're talking about forcing people to put things into their body, or maybe not forcing them, but, you know,
manipulating,
you know, it's become a direct physical, you know, poisoning. And I guess I'm starting to get a little triggered, you know, about all of this, even though, you know, it's part of the reason why I walked away from corporate in the first place.
Can I just respond to that piece? I mean, that was the hardest thing to convey to people, is like, I'm not worried about 6 months from now. I'm not talking about, some of us are really concerned for like the survival of our species. That's like a separate thing, you know. And then back to what you were saying just about the two-party system. It's like, I've always known it didn't work. And I think part of that awakening was like, because this would be people's argument, right? Oh, well, you are concerned about this shot, and so is this Trump supporting housewife from North Carolina, right? And so how could you possibly agree? And it's just like the lack of nuance, that like the only way that solidarity happens, the only way that unity happens, is that there are going to be times where we unify with people that we don't agree with all their shit. That's okay. Is that sometimes we unify around certain things. Doesn't mean you're accepting them wholeheartedly, you know, but I think there was just a super binary thinking for both Republicans, Democrats, if you want to think of it as two parties, just binary thinking. Again, like you're saying, it's like a team. It's like It's how Seven Bomar would talk about it, is like, it's always the blue and the red. It's the Bloods and the Crips, right? It's either or, it's always, and we're like literally indoctrinated to think of everything that way. And it could just be so dangerous, and it doesn't allow people the space to just have a nuanced opinion. And then and then we have this political system that only has two parties. And, politics are complicated. Our lives are complicated. White people are not a monolithic group of people. Black people are not a monolithic group of people. You know what I mean? Gay people are not a monolithic group of people. There's diversity of thought and experience within all those spaces, and it just limits our ability to be our full selves.
Yeah, and it's so strange. I feel like everything necessarily, has shades of gray. How has something that's supposed to be intelligent been allowed to develop where we can only see things as black or white or red or blue or whatever? It's beyond me how this thing has even existed. I guess because the people who created it had guns. I mean, that's the only thing that I can imagine.
And sports culture adds to it as well. There's like a whole bunch of interesting folks. I haven't gone down this route.
You said the sports culture?
Sports culture. So this is not my area of expertise, but there are whole videos and things around the spirituality and also sorcery connected to sports culture. And I'm not against sports. I like sports. They're fun, but like how they serve humanity, and back to that, like this team or this team, like it's a whole, interesting.
Wow. I mean, do you have a suggestion for a video to watch or a speaker who's talking about that kind of thing?
I don't. I'm so sorry. My best friend keeps sending me stuff, and I like just haven't had the bandwidth to go into it. So I'm sorry I brought it up, but I don't. People can like look it up. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, don't feel bad. And you can just, the next time, even if you don't have time to look at whatever they're sending you, if you would just forward it, because I can see that. I can totally see that. Anyway, I definitely feel like we're in a space where we can start to wind down. And what I want to wind down into is kind of the system and whether or not the system can be saved, but I feel like it's important, based upon your awakening, to maybe try to define what the system really is, if at all possible, in a reasonable amount of time.
I'm like, oh my God, what a question, Yuta.
I mean, like I said, if at all possible.
Okay. So I can just talk on the 3D. Let's just talk on the 3D level. So for me, when I think of the system, it's all of the interconnecting functions of our society. So it's like police, healthcare, economy, politics, prison system, transportation, elected officials. I'm sure I'm thinking about missing a whole bunch of the education system, like biggest piece there, unions, all that. So all of those different systems make up like the system. So that's how I think of it. Outside of ourselves, my individual life in my home, there is like this structure we live in. The question of whether or not it can be reformed, Yuta, is tricky, because my work is within the system for the most part, right? Attempting to dismantle it.
Attempting to dismantle it, or like I like that you use the word reform, because I think those would be different, those two.
Right. So I'm helping. So I'll answer your question first. No.
Okay.
So I think, we're and I'm nervous. I'm glad I'm on your podcast. To be saying that, because I wouldn't say this in my trainings, because that's people don't want to hear that from me when I'm working within the system. I do believe this entire thing has to fall. I don't say has to, is going to. Inevitably, it's not a sustainable system. And a large percentage of humanity is not going to be coming through with us. Okay. So that's my apocalyptic, honest opinion about the system. Okay.
Fair enough.
So within that though, I think there's ways, because I work with, like, for example, teachers. And I really do. I was a teacher by training. I was a product of the public schools. I went back and taught in the public schools. I have so much love for education and teachers. And I just want to say, I know so many amazing educators who are transforming the lives of young people constantly. So I want to preface what I'm going to say with that. And I also believe, like, I will never go back into the classroom. To me, that system is unsustainable. It was based on a factory model. There's so many things. And I do believe, I mean, I used to have this thing like, maybe all the teacher unions one day are just going to strike across the country and shut it down until we figure out a better system. But that sounds apocalyptic to people and hopeless, right? Because the other part of that is what we know is, outside of being an idealist and just talking about this theoretically, for our systems to crumble is going to create immense amounts of pain and violence and economic devastation. And I'm not naive to the fact that when I say I know it needs to fall, that falling process is super painful, is not going to be equally felt. If you have more money, you're going to be able to avoid some of these things. And then the work that I do within systems is to make sure, some people, yes, are trying to change the systems from within. I do believe some of that is possible. I've seen organizations and companies be able to actually transform from within. And also to make sure that while everyday humans are participating in these spaces, while our youth are going to school every day, right, that there are people in those spaces, regardless of how flawed the system is, that can be cheerleaders and supporters for all people, for liberation, for truth. And so, but convincing people it's going to all fall doesn't necessarily help. But people think that there are new ways that we can create, right? That's the other side, is what are we creating to replace the systems that are inevitably going to fall?
Excellent. And Ashe, thank you, for doing the work that you do and, helping to bring people into wholeness, I guess is the way that I see it. And thank you for coming on today and having, a very, I think, a challenging discussion, especially, as a person who kind of works in that world.
Well, thank you for having me on here. For the viewers, you and I have just we've known each other a little bit, but we've just started doing some of this more collaborative work, and it's just so easy and such a joy to be in conversation with you on both of our podcasts. So yeah,
love, unity, liberation.
Love, unity, liberation. Yep.
There will definitely be a link to the channel in the description of this video.
Yes. So yeah, thank you for having me here. If people want to check out my work, they can just go to my website, jessicahavens.com.
Awesome. So wait, say that last part again.
We have an IG page, Love, Unity, Liberation, on Instagram and on YouTube.
Excellent. So thank you again for all the listeners. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. I feel like this is a hard and choppy conversation, but I think that there's so many gems to be had for the right audience that I'm probably not going to do a whole shit ton of editing. If you got anything from this video, please like, share, subscribe, comment, all the things. Check out Love, Unity, Liberation. And of course, I will be posting more interesting and hella random conversations soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.